Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Easy 11 Plus live lesson, and this week we're going to be looking at one of my favourite techniques for descriptive writing. It's fantastic to have you all here. I've been enjoying seeing the comments flying in with everybody boosting for likes and subscriptions. I really appreciate it. What can I say? You're an absolutely wonderful audience. If you find this lesson useful, please tell your friends about the Easy 11 Plus YouTube channel, and don't forget that my lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Oh, and don't forget to check the links in the video description. I think that will do. Let's get started. And close a window here. Close that too. Lots of extra stuff on the screen. Good. Excellent. Here we are. So, the exercise in today's lesson is from this book, RSL Creative Writing Book 1, by me. There are two other books in the series. Let's skip past all this information here, which sort of outlines, well, some of it outlines what we're doing today. You've got me to explain it, you don't need it all written down. And let's zoom in on this page here that just outlines the method that we're going to be working on today. Now, this is my favourite shortcut for writing really effectively when you're being descriptive. And the thing about this is it's a shortcut that I believe in. Now, if you know the way I teach creative writing, I don't believe in shortcuts. I think that shortcuts tend to produce poor writing. This is a quick method that produces good writing. And that's why I really like it. We'll see whether you agree as we go through. So first of all, there's this outline of how it works, and you'll get the sense of what I'm doing and why as I explain it. So the problem that you often confront in writing is that people describe things in really obvious and boring ways, and that when you try to be creative, it's actually really hard to escape from that. So, for example, there's a smell of baking coming from the kitchen, and you say, it smelt sweet like coconut and memories of my childhood. And the reader goes, yeah, okay, that's nice, but of course it smells of coconut, it's a coconut cookie, and yeah, everyone when they smell baking think of something from their childhood, so it's really obvious. Oh, what's the example I gave up here? Let's look back actually. Oh yeah, so for example, if you say, the sunset covered the fields in a rosy glow, you're saying something really profoundly obvious that everyone has read dozens of times before. But then you think, but how do I describe a sunset in a way that isn't so terrifyingly obvious? And that's what we're going to look at in this session here. And there's a simple technique that I think will help you to do that. So the first thing to do is to go with exactly what I've just demonstrated. Imagine things in the simplest possible way. So if you were thinking, let's go with the sunset rather than the example that's on the screen, just to get your mind working. So if you're describing a sunset, what's the most obvious of the five senses? Sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Which is the most obvious of those senses for describing it? Well, of course, it's sight, what it looks like. Okay? So that's step 2. Step 3, we say, okay, we must describe this sunset without using sight. Which senses are left? So we are left with sound, smell, taste, and touch. You think, how could I describe a sunset with those? Well, be imaginative. This is where you have to use your brain, but the results are often fantastic. So if you've got to describe a sunset, but you can't describe what it looked like, what about the sounds? What might the sound of a sunset be? Well, it might be the sound of various sounds of the day fading away as the natural world calms down as people go home. So you might describe those. You might describe the sound of the birds coming up and singing, maybe for the last time. There could be all sorts of things. It might be you might describe the way that the cooing of a wood pigeon starts to be audible for the first time as the other sounds fade away. For example, say with sound, you could do lots to describe this sunset in a way that's really creative and gets the reader imagining it rather than just going, oh yeah, I've heard about a rosy glow a million times. So that's the kind of process we're going to use here. And we're going to try this out with various examples. I'd love to see your examples in the, Azzocardo Seedly. I could taste the warm air. Yeah. I really like that. Now, the question is, it's not clear to me, this is not a criticism, I just haven't thought it through enough. How would that specifically convey the sunset? How would that be different from tasting the warm air in the afternoon, for example? Maybe it's the cooling air. Maybe you could somehow convey the taste of that. What would it taste like? How could you develop that image? I think you're onto something really, really, really good here. Okay, great, thank you. Yes, what I was going to say is I'd love to see your suggestions. Now, one thing that I have not done for this lesson, and this is absolutely deliberate, is I have not prepared. So I have not looked back at the example answers that are included in the book. I haven't gone through and written example answers in advance that I can check on the desk here if I run out of ideas. I very deliberately kept my mind empty because I want you to see me coming up with ideas, even if they're not as good. I want you to see how the thought process works. And also, I love the idea of taking some of your ideas from the comments. Okay. Call me Rainbow. Can I have a shout out? Yeah, Rainbow. A shout out for you. Nice name. Peekahoo. I see what you did there. I can smell the petrol as it drifted in the air. You're taking the example on the worksheet about describing an engine starting up, and I think that is brilliant. Just one little thing, I can smell the petrol as it drifted in the air. Can you see the problem there? Your tenses are inconsistent. You've got a present tense and then you've got a past tense. That's a really common mistake that people make. Just be careful that your tenses line up, that you're talking either about now or about in the past. Right, I'm not going to talk about all the suggestions here for the moment because I want to get on with the exercise as well, because people who've done the worksheet will want to see what's happened. Anyone who's new to these lessons, and it's fantastic to see some new names here in the comments, I think. Anyone who's new to these lessons may not know that the worksheet that we're looking at here is linked in the video description. If you go down there, there's a link, you can click on it and that will open in a new tab. It'll open the worksheet in Dropbox, and then if you scroll down, a print icon will appear. You can actually print it out at home and have a go at the questions. If you get onto my mailing list, see some of the links in the video description as well, you'll actually get the worksheet a few days in advance so you can try the questions before the lesson. Right, let's get going here. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here and then go on to the next page. We're going to look at 1 here, and then we're going to go on to the matching question 1 a couple of pages later. You'll see why. It makes more sense that way. And then we'll scroll to and fro and just hope that my tablet doesn't freeze as it occasionally does when it overheats. The cat was scratching the door. What's the most obvious sense here? Okay, any suggestions in the comments quickly? What are the most obvious senses for describing a cat scratching a door? Quick. Touch, fantastic. Mutbuya, I don't know how to pronounce your screen name, but yeah, I suppose if it's from the point of view as the cat, I slightly disagree. I think that would actually be a really creative choice to do it from the point of view of a cat. So I'm not going to pick that as a most obvious. I think you've been too creative by half. Someone has said sight and sound. I agree with those. It's not I the cat I'm scratching, it's the cat in the third person. So I agree with the people who said sight and sound. Most obvious senses, sight, going for a maroon, oh it looks pink on the screen, it's maroon on mine, sight and sound. And what does that leave? It leaves touch, it leaves smell, and it leaves taste. Now actually smell and taste happen with many of the same sense receptors. It's partly a trick of the brain that we perceive one thing as smell and one thing as taste, but that doesn't really matter because you perceive it differently, and we're talking about perception, we're not talking about pure scientific ideas here. We're talking about the way that we perceive the world, the way we believe it to be, the way we experience it. I need to talk and not mumble too much. So we're going to have to pick from touch, smell, doesn't say jmel honestly, touch, smell and taste. One or more of those for our description. Touch, smell, taste. Let's go down to the answer space. Here we are. Oh yeah, so first of all we use an obvious sense. So how can we describe this using sight, sound, that kind of thing? Are there any suggestions in the comments? Okay. Let's, someone's suggesting that the car smelled of fish. Let's focus on this example, and also, the car smelled of fish? What? What were you doing with the car? Right, using an obvious sense. So, something like, its claws, I am completely making this up on the spot, its claws raked This is why I think, hang on, how do you spell raked? But that is raked. Raked the panelling. Anyone who's new here will be discovering. Oh, what am I doing? It's definitely 1L. Raked the panels. Rake the panels, simple. It's clause raked the panels with an ear. So an ear splitting, that's really commonplace. Let's go for something more interesting. With an ear, oh, I like this. With an ear ravaging. It's much more violent and interesting. Just using a slightly unexpected word keeps the reader focused without being too weird, so they go, what? With an ear-ravaging screech. Okay, I actually must admit, I actually quite like that, but we have used an obvious sense. Now, what can we do if we go with a less obvious sense? So, which were the senses we suggested? Let's pop back up. We had touch, smell, and taste. Okay, I'm going to go with touch here, I think. And the reason for that is you imagine you're in a room and someone, let's see if I can convey this. As if I scrape the mic. Yeah, think about the way that sound and vibration interact. So I'm now going to do something very annoying with the microphone. I bet that sounds really annoying. Here's me doing something comparable with the table. Okay, you can feel that through the microphone. You feel the vibrations coming through, I think, a little bit, so particularly when I was there. If you hear the sound, but you kind of feel the vibration, then, you know, sound is a form of vibration. So if you're, let's say that you're right on the other side of the door, let's say that you're leaning against the door, or, yeah, maybe you put your hand against the door, and you can feel the shivers coming through the woodwork. And what would you think as you felt this vibration coming through the door from the cat scratching? Well, I reckon if you were really angry about it, you wouldn't just be feeling it, you would already have thrown the door open and grabbed the cat and plonked it in a different place. So I reckon you don't mind too much if you're letting it do it. So I reckon then maybe you find it kind of amusing that it's trying so hard to get into the room. Yeah, placing. I'm deliberately not doing the thing which I would usually recommend of forming the whole sentence in your head before I write it, because I kind of want you to see me developing the ideas and changing them. You learn a bit more that way, I think. And you also get to see me make mistakes, which is encouraging for everybody. Okay, so placing my palm against the... Let's make clear that we're on the other side of the door here, because that clarifies things for the reader. Placing my palm against the back. Push this across a bit, so what's going on? Move. What I'm trying to do is scroll. Oh, I can't, that's why I'm not zoomed in enough. Okay. Placing my palm against the back. Goodness me, my handwriting is especially poor today. Against the back of the door. I felt... What did I feel? I felt the... But hang on, how did you feel as you felt this? Yeah, so you're amused by it. I grinned as I felt the vibrations. Let's add a little bit of detail to that. The cat really wants to come into the room. That's why it's scratching, right? As I felt the urgent vibrations come through the door. As the old urgent vibrations, well, they wouldn't be constant. They'd scratch and then they'd scratch. How do you describe a feeling that goes vroom, 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 whoa, scrolling crazy? It's pulsing, isn't it? As I felt the urgent vibrations pulse through the panelling. Pulse through the what panelling? Is it kind of light, sort of rubbishy door? Let's imagine something old and heavy through the heavy panelling. Okay. Hope I saw panelling correctly. Yes, I do make spelling mistakes. Okay, placing my palm against the back of the door, I grinned as I felt the urgent vibrations pulse through the heavy panelling. Okay, now, I think this could be improved, frankly, but I also quite like it because it gives a sense of character, that you're someone who's quite relaxed about the cat doing this. What's your relationship to the cat? What's your relationship to this house that you don't care about this happening to the door? And the fact you grin gives a little bit of characterization. It characterizes the cat. The urgent vibrations, that tells us a little bit about how the cat feels, what mood it's in, that kind of thing. The heavy panelling tells us a little bit about the house. This is a door that's made of heavy panels. I imagine some kind of oak or something like that. I'm imagining some old house, maybe. But then if it's this old house with oak doors, why am I happy for a cat to be scratching it? I don't know. So it raises lots of interesting points that could be developed as this bit of writing continued, and it also gives the reader some things to think about without just confusing them. So I think this works quite well comparing to the other one. The other one was also quite good, I think. I'm giving myself a lot of compliments today. Its claws raked the panels with an ear-ravaging screech. But that's interesting because of the vocabulary. This one is interesting because it makes you think about things in a slightly fresh way. The writer's actually getting the reader to think about a cat scratching in a way they may not have thought about it before, if that makes sense. And there's some nice suggestions for later questions. Please don't post them millions of times. Strawberry Clouds, I'm looking at you. It's really annoying because it just flies through the comments and nobody else gets to comment. And by the time I come to talk about the cake properly, I won't see your comment anymore unless you've posted it 100 more times, which would really annoy everybody, so please stop doing it, thank you. Just save it for when it's needed. Roblox Party Master was asked a good question, which but please only ask it once. But you're asking it loads of times because of Strawberry. Both of you, stop spamming. Right, the good question is, can a door lurch in pain? Yes, if you're personifying the door. Absolutely. That could be really interesting, actually. Yeah, I like the idea there. So your door lurching in pain, you could definitely work that into a descriptive idea. There were lots of ideas for later questions. Just hang on to them a bit. I won't see them until I come there, and please don't spam them. Just save them until I'm actually talking about it. There's barely any delay between you posting the comments and me seeing them, about 2 seconds. So you don't need to post your comments early. Right, the cake was ready. Let's whiz back up to where we were selecting senses. I'm not going to get through all of these, by the way, in this lesson, because I don't want to bore you. I'm probably going to do, I reckon, 3 of them, probably be about right. So where should we go now? The cake, people are talking about the cake already, so let's do that. Let's do the cake and the fighter jet. How's that? So the cake, most obvious senses for a cake being ready. Definitely how it looks. Definitely how it smells. You can imagine a description describing the smell coming out of their kitchen, and definitely how it tastes. Those are all, I think, really obvious senses for describing this. So we've made life difficult for ourselves here, because what have we got left? We have got left, touch and sound. Okay, so I'm not telling you this technique is easy, I'm telling you it gets good results, and it might be the easiest way to come up with really good results from sensory descriptions. That doesn't mean it's easy, because now what are we going to do with sound and touch? What is the sound of a ready cake? Or the touch? So let's go with unobvious sense for the moment. It's going to be something like, look, it's so obvious I'm actually not going to write it. I'm not going to waste time on it. The obvious sense would be something like the oven door opened and a delectable smell wafted down the hallway from the kitchen. It's going to be something like that, isn't it? We're not going to write that. We all know how to describe that a cake is ready using smell. That's precisely the point. If you do that, you're doing what everybody else will do, and you're not doing something which, from the point of view of an exam, impresses the examiner, but from the point of view of writing well, which is what I care about and what you should care about, it's not something that gets the reader thinking, because it's just the same thing they've read. It's the same thing they'd expect to read, let's put it that way. And you want to get them thinking by giving them something that's just a tiny bit different from what they expect. Because if it's what they'd expect, what's the point of reading your writing? They could just have the thought themselves. They don't need to. So, yeah, Anyway, let's get on with it. So we've done the obvious sense. Let's do the less obvious sense. That's much more exciting. So the sound. What are the sounds involved with cake being ready? Well, I think part of it might be the sound of the oven door. And how is the sound of the oven door going to be different when the cake's ready? Well, maybe you open the oven door and there's a slight whoomph of the steam escaping from this beautifully cooked sponge cake that's in the oven. It's maybe something like that. Maybe when you slip the cake onto what's it called, the cooling rack, maybe it makes a good kind of hollow kind of thud sound of something that's sort of, really expanded and it's got lots of air inside. You can tell I'm a great baker from this. I did some baking for some friends the other week, and yeah, there were a couple of things. I did some sausage rolls, which were okay, and I made this bread and butter pudding with panettone, which was rather fine. But the trouble is, the main course I made this pasta bake, and it came out like a rock. And people were sort of chiseling it off with knives and desperately, politely trying to stuff it into them. Anyway, don't eat my cooking, or at least stick to the sweets. So maybe I could make the cake. Right, so the sound of it, maybe it's when you cut it. Actually, I did do this in the book, I remember. Never mind. Maybe it's the sound it makes when you cut it and a bit of the cake falls over. If the cake is not ready, it's going to make a kind of thud of heavy dough, heavy mixture. If it is ready, maybe it makes a kind of bouncy, springy sort of plop, plop, plop sound of, cake falling onto plate. What am I on about? I should have prepared this, really. Listen to me waffle. Anyway, so that might be more interesting. So we can show it's ready with the sound it makes, as we cut it. So, let's go over the top here. Why not? Let's start with the knife going in. So the knife slid. No, so it might slide through the cake, but if it's well cooked, it might have a slightly crisp crust. So it's not going to sort of crash through the crust. That would be ridiculously overcooked bread, nor is it going to crunch through, but maybe it pops through the crust, just a tiny little bit of resistance. So the knife, that was past tense. Let's go for a present tense. Oh no, was ready. Okay, the knife popped. Let's go right to the first one. Have I made a mistake here? No, it's fine. It's all past tense. The knife popped through the crust. So is that a touch or a sound image? Is it the feeling of it popping? Is it the sound? I think that's down to the reader's interpretation. I think it suggests both. That's fine. You can leave things to the reader's interpretation as long as you don't create confusion. That's the only thing. Alamgir Hussain, I'm going to have a look at yours because it's interesting. The cake smell filled the whole house, so we had to open the door to get rid of the smell. I love the smell, so I was against it. Careful, that implies that you were against it. You were arguing against the smell. I think you mean that you were against the door before it was opened. Just be careful not to be unclear with your writing and don't confuse. You need to allow the reader to form a nice, clear image of what's going on in their head. My dad said the smell should instead be oxygen. So there's some really nice ideas there. There's a lot of repetition of the word smell, so be careful of that. I think you need to focus on what your core idea is and make the most of that. I think the thing in there which most interests me is the image of you leaning against the door, trying to get as close as possible to this smell, and then being surprised when the door is thrown open. And maybe that's the idea I'd focus on developing. Someone's pointed out, what am I doing? Yes. Thank you, someone in the comments says, why have you written knive? I've got no idea why I've written knive. It's because I can't spell. It's also because, when I'm live streaming, I just do crazy stuff. Thank you. The knife popped through the crust. Excuse me while I just disappear and send in someone who actually can do English to take over for me in this lesson. It's me again. There is nobody else. You're stuck with me. Right. The knife popped through the crust. Okay. Then then slipped deep with I was going to say with a soft whooshing sound, but there's room for a bit of I said we'd go a bit over the top. There's room for a bit of personification here, isn't there? Through the cross, then slipped deep with can you guess what I'm going to come up with here? It's a little bit cliched, but I think it's nice here, with a sigh. Imagine the sound of it just slipping through the beautifully cooked sponge cake, being a little bit like a sigh. And that sigh is the satisfaction of the person who goes, this cake, it's going to be delicious. So let's go with that, with a sigh. I cannot believe I wrote naive. You can see where I was going. I was sort of thinking about the plural, but goodness me. The knife popped through the crust, then slipped deep with a sigh. And now we've got a really interesting way to convey that the cake is ready. If you write this in your story or your descriptive piece, then you don't actually need to say to the reader that the cake was ready, because they can work it out from this lovely description of the sounds. And also there's the word popped, which slightly implies a feeling of what happens when you push the knife. So it's a little it's hinting at touch sensation as well. I like this. Good, we got there. Don't like my spellings. What have you got in the suggestions? The knife cutting the cake made a remarkable sound and the cake was light and creamy. I like that very much. With a remarkable sound, my only concern about that is that it's very general. Like, was it remarkable because it went wah, wah, wah? That would be remarkable. Or was it remarkable because it went bloop? Or there are so many sounds that could be remarkable. So the trouble with saying with a remarkable sound is it doesn't actually help the reader to imagine it, because it could mean pretty much anything. All you've told me is it wasn't a normal sound. So find a way to be slightly more precise. The cake was light and creamy, really like that. However, it is a sort of taste descriptions. In a way, creamy, it's to do with the feeling of eating it. So can you do something that would be more surprising? So I like your starting point, but what more can you do with it? And can you use this technique to come up with a bit more? Evo wants a shout out. This is your shout out. Is it Evo or Ivo? I'm not sure. Thank you to Maha, who's appealing for the likes. I'm not sure how many there are because I'm not looking at that display, but I appreciate your work. Right. Can you say as I cut the cake with satisfaction? You certainly could, but it isn't really relating to the sensory images idea here. It's an emotion that you felt as you were doing it. So absolutely you can say that, but it's just not the thing we're focusing on this exercise. But no problem with that at all. Right, okay, let's go back and let's look. I said the last one we'd look at would be the aeroplane, didn't I? So let's do just that. The fighter jet flew over just above the roof of my house. So what are the most obvious senses to describe this? Now, this is going back to my childhood. I grew up in the northeast of England, and it was quite, rural, and there were loads of fighter jets doing exercises, flying around through the hills on their way to the live fire ranges at Otterburn. And there used to be these jets that would sort of come past. We lived at one point in a really remote place up a valley, and there'd be these jets that would come shooting down the valley and pretty much buzz the roof of the house. It was incredible. There'd be a lot of tornadoes and Jaguars in those days. And the sound was just amazing. And what would happen is they'd shoot over, and then once they'd already passed, then the sound, because sound travels relatively slowly, then it would hit. So it would be as if you got whacked by the sound after the plane had already gone past. And it was an incredible experience. I loved it as a child, quite a small child at the time. So that's what I was thinking of here. And that sound is the obvious thing. I've just described it using sound. That's one of the things we're not going to use. And of course, the other thing that is very obvious is the sight of it. So we're left with some tricky senses. Smell, taste, and touch. Now, you could definitely come up with a description about the sort of smell of the exhaust or the taste of it or something. In reality, the thing is not going to fly past that close to you that you can smell it. If it does that, then the pilot has probably pretty seriously broken some safe flying rules and may get into some trouble. But it wouldn't matter if you did that in a description, because Phoenix and Kermit stop Roblox Stop spamming. Thank you. Please. But anyway, yeah. So smell, taste, not sure about. Touch, you could use them, but touch is really going to be a winner here. I did mention when I was describing it before the way it seemed to hit you, and that's because I experienced it. I don't think it's that obvious as something to come up with, and it's what I'm going to work with here. Definitely, it jumps out at me. Look, of course you could describe it with an obvious sense, talking about the sound, talking about the shape of it, talking about the way that it's like a blur as it goes past. How many fast things are described as being like a blur? Loads of them. Don't do the thing that loads of people do. Do your thing and make it more interesting. So the less obvious sense, we're going to talk about the feeling. So how am I going to get... So I expressed the idea that after it had gone past, then there was this shock. So rather than saying after it had gone past, let's start with the shock. Sentences starting with it can be really effective if you're careful with them, because they can allow you to explain what the it is a bit later on. So they can create a kind of temporary mystery, a little sort of suspense. So what is it here? It I want to say it slammed into me, but that's a really common phrase, so I'm going to try and avoid that. I'm going to say slapped, but maybe I'll think of something better. Can anyone think of something better than this? It slapped into me. It slapped into me like... Okay, let's go for a simile. But I don't want to say like a giant palm, because that's what a slap is. It's normally from a palm. It slapped into me like a wet fish. No. No, let's not go with a simile, because I can only think of obvious things right now. It slapped into me more felt than heard. So I'm engaging with the idea of sound in passing, just to make the point that the experience wasn't so much of sound. More felt than heard. Okay. All the really obvious things are coming to mind. Rocking me back on my feet. First of all, that's a really, really common phrase. Secondly, did it really rock you back in your feet? Did it really? I don't think so. Okay, more felt than heard. And I gripped. No, let's end the sentence. Oops. No reason it needs to be a one sentence. I gripped my pockets for balance. How's that? So you imagine someone who's standing there, if I can convey this, what? They're standing there and this thing happens, and then for balance they're kind of going like that. Just trying to anchor themselves as their body stiffens, becomes rigid. So I grip my pockets for balance. So I'm imagining the person standing there. What are they doing? Taking a detail they think is interesting and then describing it. Always be an actor when you're writing descriptively. I say this a lot. I gripped my pockets for balance. And now I'm going to breach the point of the exercise, because I need to make clear what we're talking about. I don't think I've been clear enough. And I grip my pockets for balance and stared after the vanishing speck. Rather than vanishing speck, it's a speck. That means it's vanishing, right? Because it wouldn't look like a speck otherwise. How about if you imagine it's a hot summer's day and it's got the exhaust. No, it's got the exhaust coming out behind of it, which creates a kind of heat haze. So, stared after the wavering. Yeah. And stared after the wavering speck. It slapped into me, more felt than heard. I gripped my pockets for balance and stared after the wavering speck. Okay, so we have got a little bit of sight there. I've cheated. I said we'd eliminate it. But the main idea here that we built this around is a touch sensation. The feeling of this shock wave slapping into you. Or it's probably really the sound you're hearing, but it feels like it's hit you. Sort of the emotions and the sensation overwhelms you. The feeling of gripping your pockets, for the sense of balance, again, it's related to the idea of something you feel physically. And then you stand, and what are you doing? We've just included this to make clear this is about an aeroplane that's disappearing into the distance. So you're gripping your pockets and staring at this speck, which shows it's disappeared into the distance. That tells you its speed. So you see, cunningly, we've conveyed how fast this thing is without saying anything about speed. And wavering could mean various different things, and it doesn't really matter if the reader thinks of something slightly different, but the reason I think of it wavering is because of the heat generated by the exhaust creating a haze behind it. Okay, so that's what I've done there. Bit of creative writing. Threw me down into my feet, suggests P. Ali J. I mean, that could be really descriptive. I mean, it's not actually going to do that, but then maybe I'm imagining a jet on a training exercise, but then I haven't said that, have I? I mean, maybe maybe this is somebody in a war zone, and maybe this thing really does buzz the roof of the house. Maybe it is only 4 or 5 meters above this person's head, and maybe it does actually knock them to the ground. Maybe they can smell the exhaust. There's actually no reason you couldn't, and I think about it, write about the smell or the taste in the mouth, or the sensation of actually being knocked over by the shock. So yes, I agree with you, actually. I think I was wrong. I banged my head against the wall as my body felt defeat, suggests Alamgir. You're suggesting loads of things. Well done. I know what you're saying, but that to me suggests that I walk up to the wall and go, "Do!" Which I don't think is relevant to the jet coming over. Interesting, though. I touched my house's wall and found my house was shaking with the fighter jet flew past like the flash. That's Trupti Patel wants a shout out. I think your sentence needs a bit of sorting out. I touched my house's wall and found that my house was shaking with the fighter jet flew past like the flash. Some interesting ideas there, but doesn't quite work as a piece of English if I'm going to be blunt. So maybe have another go at that and see whether you can clarify it a little bit. Shoyab, first time here, please shout out. Wonderful to have you. It's always a pleasure to have new people, and tell your friends. In fact, everybody, please tell your friends about this channel so that other people can benefit from some free 11 plus tuition. There isn't much of it around, and I want to share it with as many people as possible. If you want to help me do that, do it by telling your friends and inviting them to come and join some of my lessons. Thank you so much. The smell of the exhaust entered my nostrils. My nose wrinkled as the odour slapped me. I love that. Really good. Yeah. That's from XXXX. Yatarth Patwa. I hope that's close enough to the pronunciation of your name, and apologise if it isn't. The plane brought us a waft of wind, pounding at my face like the force of a black hole. So I really like what you're doing there. There's a real energy in the way that you write. The only thing that doesn't quite work for me is just factually like the force of a black hole. A black hole sucks in matter, so that would create a sensation of the wind flying away from you. If you could have a black hole appearing in your backyard, right? Unless I suppose you were between the black hole and the wind, and it doesn't quite work. The black hole image isn't quite right. The rest of it I really like. The waft of wind pounding at my face. I like P, B, P, B. You've got a really strong alliteration there that fits brilliantly. There's some great stuff in there. Triangle Gaming. Sir, I got offer from St. Paul's. Congratulations, that's an absolutely amazing achievement. But you don't need to call me sir, goodness me. It's a very formal lesson. No, it isn't, but congratulations. That's a wonderful achievement. Right, enough reading these out. I'm going to move on a bit. I said I'd cover 3 of these, and I have. And it's... I hope that was useful. I just got a little introduction to the technique, but you see what I'm doing here. Let's just recap it quickly. Let's look at the laptop here. Go back to the overall technique. So just quickly revise what we've done. Zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. Hee, hi, ho, hum. Right, so we've imagined things in a simple way that might be obvious, and we said, no, let's not be obvious. What senses have we used when we describe things in something in an obvious way? So the fighter jet, it was the sound and the sight. We ban those senses. We said they are not allowed. You can interpret that a bit loosely, as I've done, as you've seen, but broadly speaking, we don't want to use those, or want to avoid them. Then we say, what's left? So if you can't use sight and sound, you can use taste, smell, and touch. So then we have to describe the fighter jet using one or more of taste, smell, and touch. And then we can get some really interesting things. The examples on this page were about describing an engine starting up without using the sound of it, okay? The engine quivered, then started to shake wildly. That's what it looks like. Smell or taste, the engine shot out foul-smelling fumes that rasped at the back of my throat. Touch, as the engine came to life, the ground began to pulse beneath me. Now, none of these describe the sound of the engine, which makes them potentially more interesting and less obvious. Of course, if you need to describe the sound of the engine, then you need to describe its sound. I'm not saying you can never use the most obvious sense. I'm saying when you want to do something interesting, this is a really good way to do it. I guess that's clear. Right, enough of me waffling on about this. Let's move on and let's look at today's. There's some horrible person in the comments who has said, this is Strawberry Clouds, who has written, Robert, you're sweating in your t-shirt armpits, lol. Why do I allow live comments when I get things like this? No, that's the shadows. No, I'm really not. That's the shadows. I've got a light there shining down, which is creating shadows under my arms. I do not have sweat patches. How dare you? I love you people. Right. Yeah, where were we? We're on the tip of the week, aren't we? Tip of the week is when you're live streaming, it's best not to have viewers because they say unpleasant things. Tip of the week for this week is, as you're preparing for your 11 plus, look out for your areas where you're a little bit less strong and keep a list of them. And when you do your practice, every week or so, check the list and see whether it's changed. And you'll probably be really satisfied when you start to see things that were on your list and you think, no, I'm getting the hang of that and I can cross it off. And perhaps every month or two, put your list to one side and make a new list of the things that you're now weaker at. And as you do this, you'll find that your list changes. So the things that you're weakest at in the first place, you focused on them because they're on your list. And so now they aren't your weakest points anymore. And so your new weakest points are the things that were your less weak points before. And in the end, the things that you were best at in the first place might even be your weaker points because you've sorted out all the poor things. So keep having a list of your weak points across your different subject areas. Keep checking it, use it to guide your practice and your revision, and keep crossing things off. And it makes your learning a lot more constructive and a lot more satisfying. Okay, let's have a look for a while at your questions. What questions have we got this week? All right, Triangle. I know I've promised merch. I know I haven't produced it. I'm sorry. I am going to. I mean, I want to do it. I've just been doing lots of other things. I'll let you in on a project I'm working on at the moment is that I've got a collaboration going with Pretest Plus, who do 11 plus computer test practice stuff. And I'm producing a series of videos about the ISEB pretest that loads of people have to take if they're applying for independent schools. And that's one thing I've been doing rather than making merch at the moment. I'm going to release the first of those videos, I think, this Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, so look out for that. How do we get key information for inference questions? I sometimes can't find evidence. It's a really good question, but it's really difficult for me to answer that without having a text in front of me and being able to give examples. Have a look at some of my comprehension, especially some of my written comprehension videos in this channel, and you'll find lots about inference there. I won't always say I am doing inference, but any question where I explain something that where the passage doesn't say this thing in terms, I am inferring from the text. So yeah, look out for anything not completely obvious in my comprehension videos, and that will help you to understand how to deal with inference where there isn't the specific evidence. Good question. Can I have tips for GL verbal reasoning? Yes, you absolutely can look at my verbal reasoning videos in the channel. In the Easy 11 Plus channel. Tell your friends about Easy 11 Plus. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell button. I'm trying to move away from giving all the plugs and all the videos, but you give me two opportunities that are too good. How do you improve your vocab? I've spoken about this in lots of other videos, but people ask often enough. Why don't I give some tips now? I always say the most important thing for 11 Plus is knowing how to deal with situations where you don't know a word. So being able to find a good word to use in a reasoning exam or comprehension exam, being able to work around the fact you don't know a word and still do something sensible and logical. However, it is also important to learn words. Of course it is. The most effective way to learn new words is to use them. So as you come across new words, note them down and look for opportunities to use them in your writing and in your speaking. And that's the way that you will really learn them effectively. And that works a lot better than just repeatedly memorizing lists. So that's the main thing. How you use them, that's going to come down to what works best for you. But that's what I would advise, fundamentally. What else have we got here? Swayam, why are you writing nonsense in my live comments feed? I don't know what earth you're on about. I am acting like Roadman so wagony, so what are you saying, yo? Yes, I entirely agree. Any tips for comprehension? Of course, look at my comprehension videos. There are squizillions of them. Come on, people. And Maha, please stop posting your answer on the fighter jet. I haven't answered it because I've moved on from that. You're just dominating the comments. Azacado, Robert, I can't do your 11 Plus Lifeline sheet. It's hard in the one where I mark my own short story. I did the one called One Morning I Woke Up and Discovered I Could Fly and Struggled to Mark it. Well, the important thing isn't the marks. It's not really so much whether you give it 70%, 80% or 99%. The important thing is that you look at the other example stories that I provide there and that you get used to comparing your work to the example stories, look at the comments I've written on the example stories on each paragraph, and then say, well, what have I done that's similar or different? What can I learn from these comments, from these people's work? And start to do that kind of matchup. Tell you what I'll do. That one's just for subscribers, but there's a complete sample story writing pack on the 11 Plus Lifeline sign-up page. I'll post a link to that in the comments underneath after this video so that other people can understand what I'm talking about. But yeah, the main thing is to try and learn from the answer sheets. Don't get too obsessed about giving a percentage mark because that's just arbitrary anyway. Arbitrary? Look it up. Can I have a shout out? Says Pika, who I've already given you a shout out earlier on. 2 shout outs. Well, I guess you just got one. Hey. What are we learning next week? I haven't decided yet, but I've told you that on Saturday I'm going to be releasing my first video on the ISEB computer pretest. So that's the next thing that's coming up. That's going to be a video on the English part of the test. Then I'll do the maths and I'll do the reasoning and so on. How do we deal with time management in comprehension exams? Practice is the most important thing. It's about having really good systems for answering the questions so that you can replicate the skills when you're under time pressure. So you save time in your exam by doing a lot of work not with time limits now so that you have really good methods that you can just, as the saying goes, rinse and repeat. That's the most important thing, actually. So you know what I'm going to say? Watch my Easy 11 Plus comprehension videos. They're all in the channel. The channel homepage is broken into playlists. You can find all the comprehension stuff, do the worksheets, do the lessons, get used to the techniques. If you need more work, buy my books. See the links in the video description. Sign up to 11 Plus Lifeline. You'll get loads of resources there, and that will help you to get good comprehension skills, which will help you to have better time management in your exams. Whew. See how I got the plug in there. Right, I'm going to wrap this up in a sec. How do you use literary devices? Goodness me, that's an enormous question. I could say lots of things. The main thing I'm going to say is, I'm looking over there like I'm gazing poetically into the distance. Yeah, look at the camera. I'm doing a stream. Going mad. Literary devices. What you should be doing in your writing is trying to describe each thing in the best way. So I would not go into your writing thinking, I need to use 5 literary devices. I would think, I need to describe this smell well. What was it like? It was like this. Okay. And then look, you've used a simile. Again, I'm gazing poetically up there. I don't know why that's happening today. I'm just in a poetic mood. I'm a poseur. So yeah, describe things well and the literary devices will follow. That happens because you practice them when you're not in the middle of writing an exam story. So you might write a story in which you do try to use several similes. You might do an exercise in which you write several sentences, write 5 similes to describe the smell of a freshly baked cake, for example. But then when you come into your exam and you write your story, just try and write well and let the literary devices follow if you've done the preparatory practice. Right, okay, that's enough waffle for me. This has been a bit of a long lesson. I've waffled quite a lot. It's been one of those days. It happens. Maybe not enough coffee. It's been fantastic to have you here. Let's switch to, yes, I've integrated the music. So if you are not watching this live, you may now want to click on the video that will pop up here that will take you on to another lesson, which should be a really useful way to continue some of the skills that we've been working on today. So I'm going to keep pointing at the video. That's a mystery if you're live. It's been wonderful to have you here. See you on Saturday morning for my next pre-recorded lesson, which is going to be this time in the ICB pretest. And I'll see you live for my next lesson next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock on a topic as yet to be determined. Check the links in the video description and please tell all your friends about these easy 11+ lessons, and I'll see you here with them next time. Bye-bye.